Alright, so for this video, I am going to be delving into the BlackRock broadcasting station. And this is an interesting theory that I made a video about this kind of a while ago, but now that I've delved more into it, I've done more of like a going down rabbit holes and more of a deep dive into this subject. I think it's really important to talk about because it is relevant to the way that this realm is hijacked, the way that this realm is controlled through like the Saturn-moon matrix and all that other stuff, right? But the first thing that I want to mention is like, okay, what is the BlackRock? What is the Blackstone, right? Is that it is an island of magnetite, at the center of the Earth. It's labeled as the Rupes Nigra on these the old flat Earth maps, the old maps of Hyperborea. Back whenever the flat Earth cosmology was the dominant cosmology, before the round Earth cosmology was like the dominant thing. That this was the supposed reason why compasses would point north, and because this giant island or this giant monolith or mountain of magnetite would make the compasses point north, basically. And they placed this at the center of the Earth. So that's what the BlackRock is. But if we go, and it's no coincidence that the equity firm BlackRock, and it is called that. It's called BlackRock, and it was formerly called Blackstone. For the same reason. It's a symbolism, right? In the same way that you have like Paramount Studios, right? Whenever they have like the introduction, to every movie that Paramount makes, they have like and first of all, the name Paramount, Paranormal Mountain, right? So you could also call this BlackRock at the middle of the Earth. You can call it the Paramounts, right? And then of course you have like the shooting star symbolism, that they have in the introduction, where they have like all these floating stars that go up to the mountain. And anytime you see shooting star symbolism, that's a reference to Lucifer. It's a reference to Satan falling to earth. It's a reference to, and the thing about stars as well is that you also have, I believe it was the Book of Enoch, referred to the archons and to the demons and the Nephilim as stars. Okay, and this is why you have Hollywood stars. Okay, this is why they all have stars in the Hollywood Walk of Fame. That this is why they're called stars. Okay, so anytime you see people or entities being referred to as stars, that's a reference to the archons. Okay, but if we go into like the role that the BlackRock or the Blackstone, it also reminds me of the monolithic slab in 2001: A Space Odyssey. And it also reminds me of the Dark Tower series by Stephen King, right? So you could also call it the Dark Tower, but mainly I want to talk about the connection between this BlackRock and the cube of Saturn, right? Because whenever people talk about the cube of Saturn, whenever people talk about the black cube, a lot of people think that it's like a metaphorical thing, that it's a symbolic thing, and it does sort of act like almost like a sigil for Saturn. It does work that way, but I think that the cube of Saturn may be a lot more literal than we all think. And one of the strongest symbolisms for the cube of Saturn being related to the BlackRock or the Dark Tower at the center of the Earth, right? In the middle of Hyperborea, in the middle of the old maps. Okay, well, one of the biggest references to this is if you look at the black cube in Mecca. Okay, well, what do? They orbit the black cube, and if you look at like a time-lapse image of like the Muslims orbiting the black cube whenever they get there, it really does look like there's stuff rotating around the black cube. That like the black cube is at the center, and everything else is rotating around it. So that is an interesting correlation between the BlackRock, the Blackstone, the Rupes Nigra, the Dark Tower, and the cube of Saturn. And the thing about the cube of Saturn too is that the cube, it doesn't necessarily need to be like a straight up cube. It can also be like a monolithic structure, like our cell phones and our computers and microchips are all examples of like one of the ways that Saturn, like the cube of Saturn, can manifest. It can manifest like a rectangular slab. Like a lot of these office buildings that we have today, like a lot of, and of course you work at a cubicle, right? You're in a cube for 8 hours a day. You're on company time, and your time is being harvested in the cube, right? So there's also that connection as well. But I do believe that the cube of Saturn is mimicking the BlackRock in the middle of the Earth. I think that's what the cube of Saturn really symbolizes. is I think that it's yet again, a lot of people think that it's like a symbolic representation of the 3D realm. It's a symbolic representation of time or whatever, which I can see where people are coming from with that. And I do think I think two things can be true. But I am really starting to think that the cube of Saturn symbolism is a lot more literal, that it's essentially a placeholder or a symbol for the black rock at the center of the Earth, right? And the interesting thing about like like its location in the North Pole. The interesting thing about its location at the North Pole is you also have the North Pole of Saturn itself being a hexagon. Okay, like there's a hexagonal storm at the North Pole of Saturn, and of course, the hexagon is a two-dimensional representation of the three-dimensional cube. Okay, so you have the cube of Saturn being located at the North Pole, right? So there does seem to be this emerging connection, as we talk about this, of the connection between Saturn, the cube of Saturn, and the North Pole, and then of course, if you look at Santa Claus, right? Santa Claus is Saturn. Okay, the word Santa is an anagram of Satan, and of course, another motif, another sort of symbol to look out for is anytime you see a guy with a white beard like Santa Claus, right? That's how you know that Saturn, Father Time, Kronos, that's what's being depicted. Anytime you see a white bearded man, or a man with a white beard, okay, like anytime you see a white bearded man, that's a sign that you're talking to Kronos, Saturn, Father Time. Okay, so that's basically what Santa Claus symbolizes, and of course Santa Claus or Saturn Claus, he lives at the North Pole. Okay, and another interesting thing about this too is if you look at if you look at like the holiday that Santa is associated with, it's associated with Christmas, and of course Christmas is a pagan holiday. It's Saturnalia. It's it's a holiday that revolves around Saturn, and so of course it makes sense now. Now that I've looked into it, it does sort of make sense that like Santa Claus, representing Saturn, is the main figure that people think of whenever people say Christmas. Okay, like whenever people talk about Christmas, whenever people talk about like the holidays, people think of Santa Claus or Saturn Claus because Christmas is originated from a pagan holiday revolved around Saturn. Okay, so that's the first thing when it comes to just Santa Claus and Christmas and all that other stuff. But the other thing too that I think is interesting is if you look at Santa Claus having a workshop at the North Pole, you look at like all the elves. Okay, like he has elves working for him, and what this makes me think of is it makes me think of all the machine elves that people see when they're on DMT. You have like the machine elves; they're working on the machinery behind the scenes, like behind the curtain. If you look at if you look at this sort of like a Wizard of Oz kind of a thing, like the man behind the curtain, the machinery that props up the veil that is being put over our eyes in this reality. I think that may be what like the whole elves in Santa's workshop refer to. It's instead of elves being in Santa's workshop, it's Saturn. It's Saturn's workshop with all the machine elves running the machinery and all of this advanced technology that's being used to hijack and to sort of obfuscate the true nature of this realm, right? Like all of like the machinery and all the advanced technology that they use to pull the veil over our eyes, from this other dimension that people see when they they go on DMT or whatever. So that is another thing that the whole Santa's workshop, being filled with elves and all that other stuff. That's another thing that it reminds me of. And the thing about elves too that is sort of interesting to me is the fact that they have like the pointed ears, and like what do the pointed ears sort of remind me of? Is it reminds me of like gargoyles, and it also reminds me of like this thing. This is an interesting thing that that has come up in recent times, which is like the whole demon face syndrome, which is like the mainstream media says, oh, it's a mental illness, where people see the faces of demons on some people, and like the face looks really weird, and of course you have the pointed ears. Right, like the pointed ears seems to be a common thing when it comes to gargoyles, demons, demonic entities. The machine elves, like the servants of the archons or the archons themselves. That pointed ear motif really does seem to point in the direction of a malevolent force, running things behind the scenes. And yet again, if you look at Santa Claus being Saturn, then you have you have Saturn's workshop being located at the North Pole, and then you have the machine elves, right? It kind of all comes together that way, right? Right, but and another thing about this, the sort of hijacking that we're experiencing in this realm, If you look back at like what the black rock is made of, why is it called the black rock? Why is it called the black stone? Okay, it's because it's made of magnetite, and of course, magnetite, it's a magnetic rock, but it also forms in crystals. Okay, and that's why the black rock is black. It has this obsidian color because it's made of magnetite. But what this sort of reminds me of is it reminds me of the calcite crystals in the pineal gland. And it reminds me of like all the EMF and the electropollution that we experience on a micro level with all the cell phone towers, the wireless devices, the wireless headphones, Wi-Fi routers, radio, all this other stuff. In the same way that there's like a micro hijacking of us as individuals, and there's also like the calcification of the pineal gland with all the calcite crystals. I think that it may be possible that that the realm itself is being hijacked in the same way on a macro level by the Saturn-moon matrix, and this is where we get into the broadcast station element of it, which is sort of the core part of the theory, is that like the cube of Saturn or the black rock at the middle of the Earth I believe that it is acting as a ground receiver or a broadcaster for the Saturn Moon matrix. That Saturn is emitting a signal. It's emitting a signal through its rings. The rings sort of act like the rings sort of act like an antenna to sort of broadcast this signal, and then the Moon receives it. And of course, if you look at like the Moon, you look at like the hollow sounds that it makes whenever spacecraft impact the Moon. You look at how police officers and doctors in the emergency rooms, they can tell you whenever it's a full, they can tell when it's a full moon by the amount of the increased criminal activity and the increased emergency room activity. Okay, so the moon definitely does have an influence over the Earth. But I think that what happens is that you have the Saturn broadcasting the signal, the Moon picks it up, and then the Moon broadcasts it to the Earth. And I think that the black rock picks it up and it amplifies it, and it broadcasts it on a ground level. In the same way that you have the broadcast station in They Live, in the same way that you have the broadcasting station sort of pulling a veil over people's eyes so they can't see the aliens, they can't see the alien entities unless they have the Hoffman lenses, unless they have the sunglasses, right? Because of that sort of news broadcasting station, it's broadcasting a signal to put a veil over people's eyes. And I think that that's exactly what's happening with the black rock, or with the black stone, or with the dark tower, is that there is a signal that is being received, and it's being broadcast on a ground level to everyone in this realm. Okay, so that is an interesting thing when it comes to, like, yet again, like the whole magnetite crystals, and of course the calcite crystals in the pineal gland, like that there's a hijacking being done on a sort of like electromagnetic level, that there's like an advanced electromagnetic technology that they're using, and yet again, magnetite, calcite crystals. Okay, the use of crystals, and of course, another thing that it makes me think of is it makes me think of like, well, what if the Earth has its own chakra system in the same way that we have a chakra system? What if the Earth has its own sort of macroscopic chakra system? What if the black rock is essentially like the Earth's pineal gland has been calcified in some way as a part of the hijacking of this realm? And so, of course, maybe that's the reason why this physical realm is so dense. Maybe that's the reason why this realm is why we can't see into the astrals, because there's this location at the middle of the Earth that's been tampered with in order to support the prison system. Okay, so I mean, like that is like an interesting sort of thing that I've been thinking about, and I've been connecting dots between, yet again, the black rock, the North Pole of Saturn, the cube of Saturn, Santa Claus or Saturn Claus, living in the North Pole. Okay, so there does seem to be all these different things that sort of point to the North Pole as being sort of a central part of the control system. And another thing too that is interesting about the poles is that like the poles are very heavily guarded places. Like, I would say that like the North Pole and the South Pole are among the most heavily guarded areas in this realm. Okay, and it is kind of interesting how like all of the nations of the world are, it's all fighting, it's all wars, it's all political, mumbo jumbo. But okay, like all the nations of the world, they're going to combine their resources, they're going to pool their resources, they're going to work together and play buddy buddy. Why? In order to save the penguins? You think the government cares about penguins? You think the government cares about saving the polar bears? And that's why you can't go to Antarctica. That's why you can't go into the Arctic Circle, and you get intercepted by a destroyer. Okay, by a naval vessel. Okay, like it is because they're protecting the penguins, bro. They're protecting the fucking polar bears. Like, no, like there's something going on at both poles, I think. But specifically the North Pole, I think is a very interesting, location that I think it does have relevance in terms of like how the control system is run, how the Saturn-Moon matrix is run. And the thing about the South Pole as well is I remember looking at places in Antarctica, and I would see like pyramid shapes at the South Pole, like, in these different coordinates. Okay, so there's definitely something going on at the poles that they don't want us to know about. But yeah, that's the basic theory about the BlackRock broadcasting station. The BlackRock, the Paramount, the cube of Saturn. It essentially points to a literal monolithic structure at the North Pole or at the center of the Earth that I believe has relevance in terms of how the control system works in this realm, how the control system is run. Is I think that the Saturn-Moon matrix uses a literal cube of Saturn, or like this monolithic structure, at the middle of the Earth as sort of like a broadcasting station or an amplifier for whatever false reality is being projected from Saturn. Okay, so I do think that the cube of Saturn is a lot more literal than a lot of us think. And it is kind of interesting. I think that I want to blow up Saturn's workshop. Okay, I want to blow up Santa's workshop. That's one of the things on my bucket list is I want to blow up the North Pole. I think that would be a great place. It's almost like if you could nuke any place in the world, what would it be? I would think the North Pole. Okay, I would think that I would nuke the Paramount. I would nuke the Dark Tower. I would destroy the Dark Tower, the BlackRock. I think the BlackRock needs to be destroyed. I think that's the first step. In terms of if you were to make like a plan for liberation of the inhabitants of this realm, I think that if you can get to the BlackRock and if you can like blow it up or whatever, I think that would be a good first step. Because yet again, it is like blowing up the broadcasting station, and they live like their ability to pull the wool over our eyes, their ability to broadcast their false reality in the Saturn-Moon matrix, I think is very much connected to the BlackRock. I think the BlackRock is another integral sort of piece in the machinery of this false reality, right? But yeah, that's the video.